speaking of tactile, I'm adding a butt kicker mini. Any suggestions for an amp? Yeah. Any suggestions?
So I haven't gotten into the tactile transducers in my setup, so I don't have any experience with that. I know a lot of guys use pro audio amplifiers on them. They'll use like a Behringer, they'll use a Crown, and I think the biggest reason is you can get a lot of bang for your buck for those. You know, they don't have to be super high end amplifiers; they just need sufficient power. And a lot of times you can get those for $200-300, $400.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
My wife's a mini butt kicker.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There's
yeah, because a lot of times people don't like those types of amps because they feel like, oh, they're not, they're not hi-fi enough for them, right?
Yeah.
But for a bass shaker, you're only playing what, 40 hertz and down, 50 hertz and down, who knows, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that it's not producing like the clearest highs doesn't matter. So yeah,
I think if you guys in the chat have some suggestions for him, like I said, I don't have any experience on my own. I've done a lot of home theater tours that have had them. Like I said, a lot of them are running some kind of. They normally don't use a monolith or a pair sound for a butt kicker. They're usually using like pro audio amps. So Reverend Slim, he's got one. He says he uses the butt kicker LFE, so that's the bigger one, I believe, off a Crown XLS amp for a good while. Work great. High power, you can use a small 50 watt, but you really need the high power to move more tactile or to get more tactility. That's a good word. Tactility.
Yeah,
I like that. But pro amps are fine because you should be low pass crossover.
And you know what? It also depends on the transducer that you have, because they have some that are like this size and about this tall, right? And they have some that are like this tall and like this wide, right? Yeah. So the larger one's going to require more power, right? So yeah, it depends. If I were you, I'd just look at the RMS power. You know, it says a recommended amount, and find an amp that matches that matches,
or get him a little bit more if you can. That way you got some headroom.
Yeah. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about what kind of amp. Just make sure you feed it enough power and you're good to go. Class D is fine too. You don't need to get anything else. Just Class D. Speaking of which, I've never tried the Crowson.
Right. Yeah, those are expensive too.
So those are different in what way?
Crowson is the cream of the crop when it comes to tactile transducers. You have some, I'm trying to remember the brand, but there's a really inexpensive brand on like Parts Express. Then you get into butt kicker would be, a couple $100 per unit. And then you get into Crowson and they're like in the $1,200, So as far, again, I have pretty limited experience. I have no personal experience in my own theater with the different ones, but I've been to some home theaters that have had Crowsons. I've had some that have had butt kickers. The biggest thing with any of them is getting them dialed in. Because some of them, like literally the butt kicker, I think especially that LFE version that Reverend Slim has, that thing will rip your couch apart if you let it. I mean, like if you let it go wild, it'll seriously like mess up your setup. So anytime you have something like that, you've got all this power, you really need to make sure, number one, you dial it in as far as output, because if it's super high, it's going to be annoying. So you're watching a movie and your whole, chair is just going nuts. It's going to pull you away from that. The last thing you want to do is have that happen. You want it to be part of just this cohesive, low frequency experience. And so when you dial that in as far as volume wise, but then the other thing is making sure that it's pretty much time aligned with your other subwoofers. Because the last thing you want is like your front, let's say you got two subwoofers up front and you're using a butt kicker in your seat. Well, if there's any delay there, let's say something happens, you're watching Jurassic Park and a dinosaur is just walking slow and he stomps down. Well, you're going to feel it and hear it from your front subwoofers, but then maybe a fraction of a second, your butt kicker is going to go off. So then it's like, wait, that's not happening at the same time. So even time aligning those is
worse is when it's early.
Yeah.
When it shakes and then you hear the sound, that's the worst.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the hard part. I've seen people do stuff with like a cup of water. Is that what you've seen? They put like some water.
Yeah, I haven't
and
seen
then they film in slow-mo and they kind of see when the thing actually hits versus when the water moves.
Yeah.
Right. And then they try to align it that way. I'm like, all right, I guess that'll work. It's really the hard part though. Because
to me, it's all about calibration. I mean, when you do it right, it's phenomenal. I've heard, I like tactile transducers. I think I like near field subwoofers even better. Still not a big fan of the Hover Easy. Those aren't, I don't know. And everybody has their own opinions on those. Some people love those. The systems that I've demoed and the home theater tours that I've been through that had those, that just wasn't my cup of tea, because my brain always knew that the bass was coming from underneath me. Like I always knew that. And that pulled me out of that experience. So
I know what you mean. Sometimes having those on, like even I have a bass shaker. This is one of the smaller ones that I was telling you about.
Yeah.
But sometimes when I have that on, it actually makes a bass sound like there's less bass.
Yeah.
It's actually the opposite of what you'd expect. Right?
Yeah.
When I turn it off, it's like I can actually enjoy my bass more. Kind of weird.
I just remember the brand on Amazon. It's called Oro or Aro.
Oh yeah, Aura.
So it's a pretty inexpensive. It's like the cheapest butt kicker you can get. Tactile transducers, but they're not that great either.
Funny story. I was talking to someone who used to work at that company at Aura, right?
Okay.
And I just mentioned real quick, I'm like, yeah, I remember that one that used to strap to your chest, right? Like I really had that.
Yeah.
Right. Or it was a backpack, right?
Yeah, backpack. Yeah.
By that company, and it was made for like Sega Genesis and like video games.
Yeah.
Because you're supposed to be able to
get
like
shot.
Yeah.
It's cool.
And I actually had one of those. And anyway, he told me a whole story about that and how the Sega Genesis didn't even go down to like I don't know. I think it went down to something like 40, 50 hertz or something like that. Like, so they had to make it so that it would produce bass because it was actually not producing enough bass.
Yeah.
Interesting. But yeah, Aura.
If you're interested in joining us in the after show, you can visit patreon.com/daily HiFi. We'd love to hang out with you and get to know you better. We're going to have a lot of fun.